Good afternoon, everybody. We're just giving it a minute to let the participants join. And once it looks like that's populated, we'll get started. So thank you for being here today and give us a minute to get everybody in the room. Okay, it looks like that's stabilized a little bit. Good afternoon. My name is John Oates. I'm the president and CEO of the International Public Safety Data Institute and sit on the board of the Science Alliance, which in 2022 crafted the concept of research to practice and where we've been. And that led to what was affectionately termed Nerdstock that was presented at the Fire Department Safety Officers Association conference in St. Pete Beach in January 2023. The value of that conversation was massive. And since not everybody in the fire service was able to be there, the Science Alliance decided to replicate that in the virtual format. So to lead off that sharing of information, we're joined today by Dr. Moore-Merrell, the U.S. Fire Administrator, and Chief Ron Siarnicki, the Executive Director of the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation, that both held a tremendous role in the formation of what fire service research looks like today. This is focused on fire service research as a whole, but also fire service research that was funded through the U.S. Fire Administration and the FEMA Assistant Firefighters Grant Program. I think it's important to note that out of the initial projects that we're going to talk about through this series of webinars, Dr. Lori is the only fire service researcher that still maintains a vested interest, very deep vested interest in what firefighters do every single day. So Dr. Lori, thank you for being here today, and I'll pass it off to you for your presentation.
That sounds great. Thank you so much, Chief Oates. I appreciate the invitation and certainly the Nerdstock crew. Thank you to all of you for carrying this forward and making sure that we're able to expand on what we've done in the research arena, continue to talk about research, and continue to carry forward in this space, particularly through grant-funded research through the FEMA Assistance to Firefighters grants, and certainly the Fire Prevention and Safety and Research and Development grants. So I'm going to share my screen if that's all right, and I will begin to talk just a little bit. So John, if you can confirm for me that we're seeing that. So the screen is up. Ron, can you confirm?
I have it, yes. I'm
good.
Good.
Thank you very much. Excellent. So I just want to talk you through a little bit of the importance of the research, the importance of the work that is taking place today, even the importance of this event, the Nerdstock event, that really has taken this to a new level of translating the research into praxis, getting it in the field, which has always been an obstacle. So I just want to start and why this is so important. Well, one of the reasons that the biggest reason, in my opinion, particularly where I sit today, is why this is important are these numbers. Even this year, since not even two and a half months yet, we have had 527 civilian home fatalities. This doesn't count anything that's not reported to the media, so this number is low. But in principle, this is what we are seeing. 73 of those are children, 134 elderly. So our vulnerable populations, unfortunately, are too well represented in this number. The other thing that I want to point out, and it's not on this slide, but in the last 2 weeks, the last week of February and the first week of March, we have had 100 fire deaths. Out of those 100, 52 of them were multiple fatalities, 5s, 4s, 3s, 2 at a time. So almost half of those. And these numbers are devastating. So this is why, is because we still have a fire threat. We know even just a year ago, we watched as we had multiple fatalities, 17 in the Bronx fire, another 12 in Philly, and these fires were 4 days apart. And we watch, unfortunately, sometimes we feel quite helpless in these events. Even as the firefighters respond, they're arriving well after the fire has moved and has done its damage and the building has failed. And so we watch, and one of the things that we say today is fire is fast. The materials that we have in our homes, the materials that we have around our homes in the case of wildfire, all of these things constitute fuel, and they help the fire move well beyond the arrival, really. It is spread beyond the arrival, or before the arrival, I should say, of firefighters to intervene in many cases. And so we continue to see these death numbers. One of the other reasons that this is important is that we still don't have everyone using some very basic, simple technology that we know matters. Everything from the self-closing doors to that smoke alarm that we're all familiar with, that fire departments throughout our country distribute for free in most of our cities, and our grants are funding that kind of distribution of these kinds of technology. Even down to our, the sprinklers, residential sprinklers, and particularly those in public housing, fire dampers in the HVAC systems, or just dampers in the HVAC system that prevent smoke movement through the building. These seem to be simple and relatively normal technologies, and yet in many buildings, again, particularly in public housing throughout our country, have even the simplest of fire safety. And so that's why this still matters. We also watch it, if I stay on the subject of technology, we can even say, what about when technology increases fire risk? And we watch as lithium-ion batteries and micro-mobility products, our scooters, the bikes, these things that are being charged, either multiple on a charger or the wrong charger might be being used. So in all of these cases, we see that technology can increase the risk of fire. And these are all wonderful products. But what happens when they become a cause and origin of a fire? And even our data system today, this is something that I'm working on while I'm in this seat, is a new data system for our nation's fire service, because our data system today is antiquated, it's legacy, it can't even track these lithium-ion battery fires. And so we have to do something different in the data space to help us inform the fire problem, and certainly inform our researchers and provide information for them and a conduit to gathering information going forward. And so that's in process. The other thing that we have is that these risks, if we stay on the technology for a moment, is an increased risk in these energy storage systems where we have massive fires. And we know that UL, our research base really for the fire service, is tracking these, and they're doing the research around what causes a thermal runaway, what causes the multiple explosions, and how can we better suppress these fires when they do occur and stop them from reigniting during thermal runaway. And so all of this is part of research. We have new threats, we have new risks and hazards that are ever evolving. And so we have to continue to evolve in our research capability, in our information, and our overall intelligence to combat these fire problems. And another situation that is causing us, and why this matters and causing us to continue research, as I said, things change, don't they? They evolve. Our climate change is definitely something that is changing the face of fire, particularly wildfire. And so we know that NOAA, what we call NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, says that this is going to continue. We're going to have increased heat, which means really extreme heat in many places, extended drought, relatively low humidity. These are really setting the stage for wildfire, and that is going to perpetuate. The other thing we're doing is that we're continuing to build in what used to be forested, perhaps fire-prone land. And so that geography, as we continue to build, we are watching then that threat and hazard increase on that geography, because now there's built communities on it. And that didn't change its propensity to burn or be fire prone just because we cleared vegetation or put in homes. And so it's important that we continue that research. And we've watched as NIST and some of the partners and other federal agencies have really looked at research. What can we do to make fire adapted communities? How do we harden the built environment in your homes? What kind of ignition resistant materials can we use? And so all of this is coming to bear and really needs to continue in the research space. So the climate-driven wildfire, these are just some statistics of what we've seen in the past few years. Over 97,000 structures have been destroyed in just a 15-year span. We watched the top 5 fires that have really occurred in the last 15 years. We watch as this really changes the effects on local economy. We have communities that once they burn, they're not rebuilding. So literally communities are being destroyed and not coming back. The long-term health effects we still need to consider. And then damage, of course, to those ecosystems and watersheds. When we don't have water and the watersheds available to fight these fires, then that's going to exacerbate the problem altogether. So these are reasons, again, why this matters. So with that, I would really like to spend a couple of minutes talking to you about what is the USFA doing to come alongside our researchers and all of this space that I talked about. Why does this matter to the fire service? Why is it important? Well, we brought together the leaders of the fire service in October of last year, and we put them in a room and hosted the first summit, the Fire Prevention and Control Summit, since President Truman hosted the first one in 1947. So 75 years later, with our partners at NFFF and Ron Siarnicki, Chief Siarnicki stepped up in a big way and said, yes, we're in, we'll partner with you. And so together, the U.S. Fire Administration and the National Fallen Firefighter Foundation, along with all of our national fire organizations, partnered to come together. And out of this, we have the opportunity to speak with leaders of the federal government. The Secretary of Homeland Security, Ali Mayorkas, joined us. He listened and he continues to listen to the fire service. His deputy, John Tian, also present where we could talk to him directly. We have Administrator Criswell from FEMA who joined us and listened as your leaders, the national leaders of the fire service, sat at a table and explained to them the situations we have. Chief Donna Black of the IFC talked about wildfire. We had Chief Kevin Quinn talk about recruitment and retention. Ed Kelly from the IFF talk about firefighter cancer. We had Chief Ernie Mitchell on behalf of the NFFF to talk about behavior health. We had Jim Pauley with the NFPA to talk about building codes and standards. And so this is how we came together to talk about what's important to the fire service and why this has to matter. And so out of that came what we today call our National Fire Service Strategy. And there are 6 items or 6 issues that we highlight as part of this strategy that should give you some information about where we still need research, where we still need intervention, what are issues still for the fire service today that are yet to be resolved. One of those I've already mentioned is wildfire, the impact of climate change. Some of the specifics here have to do with firefighter training in the interface. That is incredibly important that we have training for firefighters responding in those communities that I spoke about that used to be forested areas or areas that were primarily green. Now we have built environment, we have communities there, and yet they're still fire prone. And so we're going to have to make sure that our structural firefighters are prepared to respond, not just when there's one structure on fire, but when there are multiple on fire at once. Strategies and tactics change in that space. And we still don't have proper PPE for the firefighters in that space either. The next one has to do with recruitment and retention. We have a recruitment problem for first responders across this country. And if we do not, as a fire service, stand together and figure this out, then we are going to have a massive shortage. I know across the nation, even now, we are having firefighters who are mandatory overtime back. Well, how does that exacerbate our exposures on the job? How does it change and increase the propensity for behavioral health issues? How does it increase our lack of sleep? So this is an issue. We have to make sure that we can recruit and change how we are reaching out and bringing in new first responders to our cadre. The next one has to do with cancer. 75% of the firefighters who have occupational death today are from cancer. And so we have a long way to go with cancer screening and how do we eliminate the toxins in our environment as best we can. We're not going to eliminate all of them. The products of combustion are always going to be present, but some of them we can. we can work to eliminate PFAS in our gear and in the fire suppression foams that carry it. And there are other things that we can lessen through adequate PPE and knowing how to don and doff our PPE appropriately and washing our skin and all of the things that research has told us and will continue to help us understand. The next one has to do with behavioral health. And for this one, it's, continued focus on PTSD, continued focus on the space around suicide. And far too often we see that still in the fire service, but also talking about building resilience in our firefighters. We have to be prepared to talk about the pre. How do we stop our firefighters from moving to a post-traumatic stress situation? How do we build within them mental resilience so that they can carry on and do what they need to do and process normally as best they can the things that they feel they cannot unsee? And so building mental resilience is a big piece. The next one has to do with building codes and standards. We have building codes and standards that have been adopted in a large amount of the nation, down to the states, down to the local level. But often there's not a good deal of consistency in those. From the feds to the state to the local, that consistency is not there. And in fact, once they're implemented, adopted, there is limited capability for enforcement. And so we need to focus on that and make sure that our fire departments have adequate resources to be able to enforce what we know about building codes and the science around the building codes and fire safe housing, particularly in our public housing space. One of the things that we are saying as part of this whole national strategy is that, and it goes back to where I started really with the fire deaths in this country, because most of them have to do with poor people and people of color. And this effort here says that, safe and affordable housing should not be mutually exclusive. And I think that's important as we talk about continued fire and fire research in this country. And there's one more that is in the national strategy that I haven't mentioned just yet, and that's the elevation of fire service within federal government. And so our stakeholders, our partners in the National Fire Service is certainly working on that to make sure that the fire service is elevated and recognized and has the resources it needs to carry forward and maintain that safety net that we have, as we all know, the fire service as the all hazards responder across our nation. So with that, John, those are some of the reasons I believe this is important, and I'm going to hand it back to you.
Outstanding, and thank you for that. For not just that, but for being that driving force, which is moving the fire service forward at a faster pace. It's interesting when you look at all of those things and think about how far that we've come, and think about where this effort started with those fire service organizations, with the U.S. Fire Administration coming together and going, there's got to be a better way. We need to know more than we did yesterday, and that led to the creation of the Fire Prevention and Safety Grant Program. And certainly a huge part of that was the research agenda setting, is how do we know what we need to study unless we have intake and information from all the fire service organizations. And we're fortunate that the driven researchers such as yourself had a strong partner in the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation that led that charge. So with that, Chief Siarnicki, I'll pass it off to you to talk about what that looked like and how that came to be in nearly 20 years ago in this process of research in the fire service.
Thanks, John. And first of all, let me say that I'm so pleased to be here with everybody today. Anytime I get a chance to share some discussion with good friends like our United States Fire Administrator, Dr. Lori Moore-Merrell, who has just been a dynamo in trying to bring our organizations further along, and most of all, reduce the occurrences of fire injury and death in our industry is just a phenomenal treat. And of course, John, we've known each other for a long time. We've done a lot of projects related to research and others, but we have some momentum. And if we don't continue the momentum, then shame on us. We have a chance to improve our industry, and that is what today's discussion is all about. So I too am going to share the screen. Get back to you guys in a few if it pops up here, I hope. And awesome. And I will run us through a couple of these slides. But as you could see, a quote here from Peter Moore-Merrell about what we find changes who we become. The reality is that the need for research within our industry is a critical factor. And I relate that back to when I took my EFO program at the Fire Academy, and Chuck Burkell was running the program then. And he for many years helped administer through a lot of fire officers to finish the executive fire officer program. But on day one, he would talk about the need for research. And if anybody has taken that program, they know that there are research projects that have to be done each year with a 4-year program. And what he said there was, if we wanted to be a professional entity, we needed to conduct the research that would make our service better. Just like the medical profession, the education profession, and that stuck with me throughout my entire tenure, and the understanding of really making sure we would identify the things that needed to be changed, but also how to move it forward. And as you talk about research and those aspects, it truly is about preserving the fire service community. Our environment is changing, the technology is changing, and it really helps us to embrace those new ideas and aspects of our industry that are out there helping us better perform, advancing humanity from the standpoint of making it safer for our civilian population and for firefighters. And most of all, extending the knowledge of each of the individuals who've contributed to get our fire service where we are today and where it's going to go down the road. And so the research element is such a critical component. And there's been research all along the way, but it really became much more organized when we adopted, as an industry, the 16 firefighter life safety initiatives. Many people have heard us talk about the Tampa summits. That was shortly after 9/11, when the fire service gathered in Tampa, Florida, to talk about, can we in fact embrace safety in our culture and really begin to make a difference in the survivability of our membership. And 230 fire service professionals gathered in 2004. There were a variety of topics that were thrown out there to begin the discussions, but it was really an open forum to develop a blueprint on how we can reduce firefighter deaths and injuries. And thus the 16 firefighter life safety initiatives were born out of that effort. And one of those initiatives, initiative number 7, was the discussion about creating a national research agenda and data collection system that relates to the initiatives. And we have been talking about data for a significant amount of time and the need to address that data. And it is of critical importance that we find the right collection means for that data and use it to really help us with the research that needs to be done. And that became the emphasis of initiative number 7. So a lot of questions came about why the NFFF was involved with that. Well, first of all, we have a congressional mandate, of course, to honor every firefighter who dies in the line of duty, but also to work with the fire service community to reduce those injuries and deaths. And we're that one neutral entity, along with our good friends at the United States Fire Administration. And we have the capability to bring partnerships and, to be candid, funding to the table through our fundraising efforts and our corporate partnerships. So all of that made it possible for the foundation to be a catalyst for increasing the national research agenda. We held the first symposium on research in 2005 in Emmitsburg, Maryland. Every organization within our industry gathered to talk about that, to stress the importance of that, and to look at projects that they felt were important. And that was critical because at the time, our industry partners were doing research in areas that they felt were important, that may in fact help their business model, but they weren't getting input from the fire service. I've seen many of projects designed that on theory, on blueprint, sounded pretty neat until you tried to apply that to the National Fire Service and the application on the fire ground, and it just didn't work. And so we followed it up in 2011 with another gathering to fine-tune those, and then the fire service realized that tying them to the Assistance to Firefighter Grant Program provided the emphasis and support for those projects to really get the grant funding needed to bring them to fruition. 5 years later, in Arlington, Virginia, we looked at where we were, the progress that was made. And as you can see, every 5 years, we're trying to update the National Fire Service research agenda. With COVID in 2021, we had to do it virtually, but still accomplished it. And from that aspect, a whole array of projects have come to reality. And what's important is that not only have we been looking at the agenda topics, but in 2007, we put together a white paper on the entire process of how funding or how research within the fire service community should be conducted, how it should be elevated. And at that point, we were looking for a champion to take it on. And here we are now with Nerdstock, of all great names, trying to bring science to the station. And we embrace that transfer. And we embrace that support by outside entities who are saying, yes, there is an importance with this research. And what we have to do is work in unison to bring that forward. And so from the foundation's aspects, we're going to continue to seek funding and partnership to keep the symposia moving forward. We want to find funding for research recommendations being reported out.
I think it's unfortunate. I think Chief Siarnicki hit the wrong button, but we'll continue here for a minute until he joins back in. And I think it's important that he noted the impact of the National Fire Academy's Executive Fire Officer Program, and certainly what Chuck Burkell brought to that program. I too graduated from that, had the benefit of many Chuck lessons, and how that can take the average fire officer and make them so much better as it relates to how they lead, how they respond in their community, how they deal with community risk reduction, executive leadership, all of those things to make them better, and to be able to research it at the same time. I think because so much of the challenges, and Dr. Lee, I'll ask you the first question, is how so much of what's been done is like stacking pennies. We get a little bit, and then we get a little bit, and then we get a little bit, and we get a little bit. As somebody that's been on the forefront of this for a significant portion of your career and seeing that breadth of changes, what advice would you give to an early career researcher or a firefighter interested in research to take that jump and to keep going when, in the face of all the things that you've mentioned, it's like, holy cow, where do I start?
That is a great question, Chief. So I think what I have advised and some people before, and in fact, the EFO folks who were just entering the program, or I shouldn't say that, those who were just getting ready to do their final papers, and you have to work on a paper during EFO, it's something to deliver. And so I actually met with them, and some of them were at a loss. And so we'll just use that program Same thing for researchers. Unless you have something that you're already passionate about, that you personally have experienced, that you know that you experienced a gap in your own career, this didn't exist, or we had an issue, with, for me, it was, I'll just use mine, crew size, right? Where you are constantly thwarted with either the lack of an industry standard at the time, and we needed the science to have an industry standard, or you needed we had to use consensus to reach an industry standard in the absence of science. And so that was my driver, is that I watched as crews were deployed with 2 or 3 people, and sometimes not even that, right? One driving there and meeting other people. And that's hard. It's difficult to assemble an effective response force, and it's dangerous. It increases the risk to the firefighters responding. And so I watched all this happening in fire departments, throughout the country, and said, we have to have the science around that. And so I think others can find their driver. What is it that you see that's a gap? What is it you see that is a danger to firefighters? And it's a health and safety driven, situation for you? Or is it a community safety driven issue for you? Is it maybe around the buildings? Maybe we got to figure out, how do we better message? That's been something we talked about. How can I get behavior change? Because we message around fire safety all the time. Smoke alarms, don't take your batteries out. I mean, these simple things. Is it something in our message that people aren't listening to? How do I get behavior change? I mean, I could go on all day. So as I met with this EFF program, I am like, you guys are not thinking, because there are tons of gaps out here that we still have a need to connect with science to inform us in this space. Generational differences, you guys have heard me talk about that many, many times. We have got to figure this recruitment thing out. And I think it's going to be a science link to how do I engage them to, first of all, desire to see this as even an option, the fire service. Then how am I going to train them so I don't lose them in the academy, because I'm teaching in a way they don't learn or connect with, because we're, stuck in tradition. What are these things that need to change to resolve some of these national strategy issues that I brought up? So I guess that's how I think about it. John, when I start talking, it starts going like this, the place, because there's so much. So I hope I somehow answered the question you asked.
No, it's awesome. Thank you very much, Chief. Welcome back. And I asked as a primer question before we open it up to the group, is so many of the things that we do are like stacking pennies. We add one thing on top of another thing on top of another thing. And in the face of the daunting task for certainly somebody like you that, full career in PG County and really made the foundation into the robust organization it is today. What advice, what guidance would you give to an early career researcher or a firefighter in the EFO program, as you mentioned, that is interested in research and wants to make a difference? That how do they keep going, and how do they find that thing that will keep them going and motivated over time?
I've got that answer for you, but first I got to say, isn't technology wonderful? Because we had a power spike in the building and everything went dead for just a second. So I apologize for that.
Of course.
But I think the answer is to find your passion. Find the topic that hits home with you. If you're starting out, find something that you can relate to, and then build upon that and develop that successful strategy for that piece that fits. And then from there, use that same process for the next topic and the next topic. And you'll find that there are as many passions we have. And I have to say that, for me in Prince George's County, we lived the residential sprinkler fight through that process of getting that adoption. And that became one of my thesis topics for EFO. And it's one of my pieces. I'm still out there across the country telling the story about seeing a major reduction in firefighter death in occupied structures, and then having to deal with those structures that weren't protected, and having the very young, the very old, those that have challenges fiscally, socioeconomically, are the ones that are the victims. And unfortunately, that isn't changing, and it has to change.
And I think you brought up an interesting point that both of you have shared before, that we're never done. There's no such time as the fire service could possibly go like, we got it, it's all done, we're set, we don't have to do anything else, because of the evolving universe that we operate in, and the work that we do that continues to change. So I'm going to stop talking for a minute. So attendees, if you would like to ask a question of our esteemed panel, if you would raise your hand, the moderator will switch your mic back on. If you just do me the kindness of identifying yourself and where you're from before you ask your question. Can't believe there's no questions. Come on. You get a once in a lifetime opportunity to talk to the leading people that are help driving our fire service forward. So
well, as they're getting into position to ask that question, one that comes to me a lot when I'm out on the circuit is, no, we're never done, but what responsibility do we have to keep the momentum going forward? And I know that our fire administrator has talked about this as well, but I really believe we have an obligation to find that next generational level of fire service leaders who can bring to the table the passion and the commitment, and most of all, the emphasis to create change in the organization. And so one of the pieces for me always has been is that succession plan. And the day I made chief, we started succession planning. And I can remember some of our senior staff saying, you made it, you're the chief. Why are you succession planning? Well, the truth is, I'm just another brick in the sidewalk advancing forward. And so my job is to be the solid foundation for the bricks that go above me. And Lori, I know you've talked about that before, but you've had some great insights on that I'm sure you'd love to share.
Oh, absolutely, Chief. And I think that, in that space, leadership, you should be forward thinking, right? We do have to do succession planning. You've got to make sure, and we often just say, leave it better than you found it, but you've got to make sure that you're very methodical in that thinking. And so like you, we were like-minded in that. The first month I was here in this space. Well, first I was thinking, what the heck was I thinking? But after that, realizing that, yes, we've got to move forward. We've got to right the ship for the USFA and get it back to its rightful space as leader of the fire service in the US. And so as I think through that, I began to think, who is next? Who can come and be next? And how do we actually change the paradigm about leadership in this space, right? How do we change the mindset of who can sit here and lead on behalf of the nation's fire service? And I think we need to be really thoughtful about how that choice is made going forward, and the credentials, and how to elevate this, to where it rightfully should be. And so I see myself as a change agent. And Ron, I know you've expressed that before too. I'm here as a change agent. And I know that, and that's okay. That's what I do. And so moving to next is something that I want the whole of the fire service to be thinking about. And how do we sustain? Because that's what succession planning does. It's when you leave and everything keeps going, right? It wasn't all about you. You put in infrastructure, you build up new leaders, and when you walk away, nobody notices you even left. And for me, that's what this means. And that's what we have to think about, I think, as leaders.
And that, that portrays an incredibly high level of leadership. And I said that when I left the fire department. If the place falls apart the day I walk out the door, I didn't do my job as a boss because I didn't develop people. So I think that's important to tie a bow around we are the caretakers of our craft and the stewards of the fire service. For the people in the group, the original agenda setting meeting in 2005 had about 57 participants from across the America's fire service. there's probably less than 20 of them that are still actively engaged in our fire service in a very short period of time. So that means that people move on, different careers, different interests, things like that. So our younger generation of early career researchers, early fire officers, company officers, maybe even somebody that's riding facing backwards on an engine company in a community right now, are those people that are going to help carry this forward, and that we need that input from. Dr. Janke, I see your hand raised if you would like to ask your question.
I just can't shut up, but I do have to. This is Sarah Janke, with the Center for Fire Rescue and EMS Health Research, and with the science lights. I couldn't figure out how to log on the other way, so I thought I would just watch from the participant perspective. And this is awesome. But I had a really interesting conversation with Denny Compton earlier this week, and we were talking about the fire service and that whole saying about 100 years of a tradition unimpeded by progress. And I would love to know your thoughts on, does that ring true? Does it still ring true? Like, I don't know, just.
Well, I'll take that first, Ron, and then I'm going to tag over to you. Okay.
Absolutely.
Denny Compton, first of all, is very close with both Ron and I. He is one of my notable mentors and has advised me well, and describes me as a sausage maker. So that fits in my change agent that I told you guys, right? So I'm here to make sausage, and nobody needs to know how to make sausage. You just want to see it good on the outside, right? And so I think that's part of it. But Sarah, I think the tradition thing is changing. And I think that was really steeped in. Do we have some dinosaur eggs? Absolutely. We have dinosaur eggs in various places, but we also have some pretty good energy in leadership and newer. And I'm going to go back to my generations, because this is not about an age thing. It's about a mindset. It's about the different ways of looking at things. And we've got new leaders who have been born into technology. They've been born into data. They've been born into ways of looking at things differently. And I think that we are starting to see that energy take hold. We're starting to see some really good growth in the fire service. Sorry, we here at USFA and are green, so my lights, go out periodically. And so
at least your power stayed on.
I know, right? So I think the tradition, yes, there are parts of tradition that we need to hold on to, right? How we honor each other, how we take care of each other, how we have our family driven passion about belonging, and how that should be carried out. And some of those things in principle we do need to hold on to, but there are many things we need to let go of and change and evolve. So I can get a lot more specific, but I'm going to tag over to Chief Siarnicki.
Thanks, Lori. And I agree with you on your comments and your thoughts. And how I would approach this is that, yes, we still have pockets that are living much different time zone than the majority of the fire service community. And we see that in the video clips that are out there and some of the other stuff. But what I think is most importantly is we've made progress. And how I justify that is the data. And I know you're going to love this one, Lori. Let's talk about line of duty deaths. Now, I've been with the foundation for 22 years. Hard to believe, but 22 years. When I started, we were averaging 150 line of duty deaths per year. We adopted the 16 firefighter life safety initiatives as an industry. And you talk about progress impeded by tradition and the culture fights of that word being used. And, one of the initiatives was to change the culture and the battles we've been through. And that's okay, because it's family. You fight among yourselves, you argue about it, but that's how you get results. And that's how you get to the positive end. But in the time frame that we adopted the initiatives, the criteria that was used for line of duty deaths, we went from 150 down into the 70s. as an industry. So obviously something happened out there. And what that meant is that we seriously took on changing the way we did business. And that was the traditional criteria with vehicle accidents, building collapse, smoke inhalation, cardiac. We began to address that. Now, unfortunately, the numbers are back up, but this is why. Because we became aware of cancer, and we took head on the issue of cancer in the fire service. And I can remember in my younger days, you would see people come out of a burning building, and the first thing they did was, light up a Marlboro. We don't do that anymore. So obviously that's changed. Yes, we have issues with smokeless tobacco. We got a bunch of variety of issues, but we're addressing that. So that's that progress with cancer. Of course, World Trade Center, those diseases increase our numbers for the memorial, but it's brought awareness to that whole multitude of the byproducts of combustion and what that does to our bodies. COVID, brought a whole array of other occupational illnesses onto our radar screen. And now, finally, and it's taken a long time, the element of suicide in line of duty. Who would think that we'd even be talking 30 years ago about suicide and line of duty deaths? We wouldn't. Today we are. So, Sarah, to answer your question, I think we've moved the spectrum along considerably, and just following the causes and the acknowledgments of the line of duty deaths alone proves that fact. That's my thought process.
And I would add, if I could tie a bow around that, I would say that we are people that are wired for change are incredibly impatient. It's what drives folks like you, right? You have high speed load drag, we're going to charge all the time, and we want results. Like, I want it yesterday. But the fire service doesn't, nothing moves at the pace of the change that we want, or very rarely does that happen. And some of the change that we experience in the fire service that's going to improve the fire service is generational. You both were in the fire service at that time. Think about the incredible ruckus that was created late 80s, early 90s, when we told firefighters they had to sit down and put a seatbelt on in a 4-door cab, or we're going to take your 3/4 boots away. I mean, find a firefighter under the age of 40 today that's worn a pair of 3/4 boots. They look at you like, yeah, when I go fishing. But so, I mean, that's part of what that challenge is because we're such a historical organization, because we've been around that long. Sometimes we don't stop too and give ourselves the grace to take credit for some of the things that have happened that have moved the needle. Other questions from the group? Sarah, your hand is still up. Do you have another question?
No, I'm just being obnoxious. Sorry, I don't know how to take it.
Chronic overachiever. Okay.
And a heck of a researcher along the way as well.
Amen to that. And the fire service is fortunate to have her team and others, the OG researchers that Nerdstock illuminated. We're fortunate to have those people endeavoring on our behalf. So we'll wrap this up. I'll give it Dr. Lori, if you'd like the closing comments, and then finish off with Chief Siarnicki.
Absolutely, I'd be happy to. Thank you. And I want to thank Sarah, just recognizing Dr. Jenke for what she has put into this, the ideas and her team. Every time I call Sarah with a proposition of, hey, what do you think about, or could you do? She is always, what do we need to do? And she's on it. And so I'm really grateful for her and the way that she leads that research cadre. It is a tight group. We are growing in the research space, but it's still, we've got way too few for what we need, and the gaps that we have in our industry knowledge, and being able to bring science to bear in all of our standards. I mean, that's just go there, right? We've got a ton of standards that are still consensus based because we don't have science to inform them. And so I know Sarah and her team and other of our researchers are working in that space. So this work is important. The continuing research, our funding is important for these grants to be able to enable research. And we're not done there, because it's certainly, I know it's insufficient. I know it's not enough. And so we will continue to work toward that.
Outstanding. Thank you, Dr. Moore-Merrell, and thank you, for what you're doing on behalf of the America's Fire Service, for sure. Chief Siarnicki.
So first of all, something that Lori can't say, but I will, for those that are out there that are watching this or will see this in the future. Lori talked about the funding to make some of this happen. That's critical, but that's only going to be possible if you take the time to reach out to your legislative representatives and tell the story about the successes of what this research has brought to our industry. And that fight on Capitol Hill lies at our feet. That is something we as the fire service must deal with and address to get our fair share of the research funding, the equipment funding, the staffing funding that is so vital to the success of our programs and the survivability of ourselves and our communities. So that little piece about legislation is critical, and the only way we do it is through our voice. And we must speak with one voice as we carry the message across the halls of the Hill, as I would say. And a good opportunity, CFSI events are coming up. That's your chance to promote that. I think the other piece, though, most importantly, is to get that's a closing statement, and going back to something John had asked me, is you have to get involved. This is not a sideline industry or sport. If you want to see a change, if you want to make a difference in your career, whether you are a paid member of a fire department or a volunteer member of a department, you got to say something, you got to get engaged, you got to roll up your sleeves, get your arms dirty a little bit, and contribute to the process. For so long, I've seen people just sit back and complain, but don't do anything to make a difference. And that's the challenge. It isn't just us, it's everybody. So think about that. And if you want to get involved, reach out to us. I'm sure our administrator would love to hear from you about how you want to help the fire administration carry out some of its programs. I can tell you from the Fallen Firefighter Foundation, we'll take all the help we can get. Same with Sarah and John and their programs and their activities, because this is truly a contact sport and you got to get engaged. So I love being here and chatting. Most of all, thanks for this opportunity. I still can't believe, from a kid who grew up in a steel mill town, I'm involved with something called Nerdstock. I love it.
Awesome. Thank you, Chief. And you're 100% right. Fire Service One Voice is a cool hashtag, but it's even better for what it represents and what the power of the collective as we continue to move forward for the first time in a very, very long time. And Dr. Moore-Merrell, it's credit to you and your force of personality to get everybody to the table and to agree that we are better as a whole rather than we are separately. So thank you for kicking this off for the attendees. This is going to be the first in this series of understanding from where we came, where we're going, and perhaps why we do some of the things that we did. So thank you, Science Alliance, Dr. Janke, thank you for hosting this and creating the platform. And we look forward to seeing people at future events as we continue to walk through the research outcomes over the past decade and a half. Thanks for spending some time with us. I hope everybody has a great rest of your afternoon.
Take care, guys. Thank you.